What if I could fix the state deficit, repay the national debt, get tens of billions of fundings for innovation and decarbonation? I will not create any additional tax, and I will not reduce the welfare state. In fact, the service level will increase. I will also fix capitalism, reduce inequalities, make the world a better place to live in. Wouldn't that be incredible? Well, we can achieve all those goals together, but first, you need to concentrate and watch this video because there is a lot of information to compile. This is the world we live in. I'm using data from France, but it's very similar in many other countries. So here we are looking at data, it's a distribution of wealth among people. Okay? What it says is that the first 10% of the people have less than nothing. Then the next 10% they have very little. Next 10% they have 3 times this amount. And then it goes up, up, up until the last most rich 10% with this amount. Okay? We can view that in this pie chart, which looks like a cake. So it says that 10% of the population here, they have half the cake. Then the next 10%, they have 1/3 of what the rich guy here had, and then less, 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 up to nothing. Another way of seeing it is here. You view that as a curve, which is here at the bottom. And there is a concept called the Gini index, which is a way to measure, how curvy is that curve, and how far it is from this perfect line here, which is like the full equality, where everyone has the same wealth. Okay, so the larger this gap, the larger the Gini index, and the largest the equality. I don't know if you know, but France is a country which is relatively less unequal than others. But still, I'd like to make you touch how unequal the world is. And for that, I suggest this approach. Here I've done some calculation that shows that the 31st percent of the population, they have only 1% of the wealth. Then if you go up to 60%, you reach 12%, then up. I want to show you how that looks. For that, I'm going to take this first tenth of wealth, and we've seen that it's 60% of the population. So I'm going to do 60% here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Then pick a color such as this one and duplicate that 6 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then if we go one level up, so 10 more percent, we reach this level 2. Okay, so I can do that here by just pasting 10 more people and maybe choose a darker color because they have a little more money. Then 10 more people, 10% more, and we reach the 30 milestone. So I can materialize this way, paste, and pick a darker color. Then the next milestone is a jump of 20 with just 10 people. So it looks like this. Put 10 people, 10 cells with a darker color and square. And then from 50 to 100, 10 more. So this can be shown here. Okay? Here it is. Okay? So that's the distribution of people among wealth. We can see it's not a pyramid. In fact, it's more like an Eiffel Tower, but very flat. And in fact, it's even worse than that, because here you have 60% of the population. But remember, with only 30%, you have 1% of the wealth. And this can be demonstrated by adding, I can't even use the Excel, I need to add a shape for that. I could have a very, very thin layer, which goes from very far on the right to very far on the left. Put that into yellow. So it's only 1% high. Okay, remember that this first line here was 10%. Here's 1/10 of that. And in that very, very thin, I've got 30% of the population, which is like packed, compressed into that very, very thin layer of wealth. Okay, so that's our Babel Tower. That's where people live. And again, remember, France is relatively equal. Okay? Now, if you look at the history of mankind, you can see that when there are too much inequalities, well, the world doesn't turn round properly. It finishes with revolutions and wars and riots. Like we had in France a few years ago with the yellow vests. So I think we need to change something. We have to change something, and we have to change it urgently. Because very soon, robots are going to create astonishing quantities of wonderful goods out of thin air and what? Fusion energy. And there will be no labor anymore. So who is going to buy those products? Because those guys at the bottom, they are proletarians. Marx called them that way, and before that, Romans. Those guys, they have just their arms and their work to get the food for them and their family. What will happen to them if there is no more labor? And moreover, with GAFAM and tech, winner takes all. So it could be one or two brands. So what? We will be in a situation with 20 guys owning the planet and everyone else with no money to buy all goods. It could be an era of abundance, and it will be pure hell with riots of, starving. I believe this is a situation mankind has never encountered. Labor is the foundation of our society. So, how do we solve that? I think we have to find a way, or we are going to run into serious problems. Why is there inequality in the first place? How do we end up with a distribution so bluntly unequal? The problem is the capitalism. Because you see those guys at the bottom, they have no capital, they have nothing. So probably they have to rent their apartment to an owner of the apartment, who is higher in that flattened Eiffel Tower. And the guy who owns the apartment, maybe he lives in a house that he has bought on credit to a bank. So he's paying interest, which is to someone who is higher in the Eiffel Tower. The more you go up, the richer the people get. So the money flows up all the time. So some economists say, yes, but those guys up to the top, they are going to spend the money to buy a car or a yacht sometimes, so it's going to flow back into the economy. Well, partly, but somehow they are also going to make the cost of the asset rise. So, for example, they are going to buy a Picasso, so it's going to be crazily expensive because there are so few Picasso, or diamonds, or maybe bitcoins. Bitcoins brings no value except it's a way to save money. And this money disappears from the circuit. It's produced by the people working, probably working at every level, and then disappears at the top transformed into Bitcoin or sometimes housing. If the cost of the housing doubles and the people at the bottom they don't get the similar rates, at the end they have less free money to spend and they get poorer. So somehow the root cause of the inequality is the interest going up, up all the time. So we've seen that capitalism creates some kind of imbalance. How do we do to restore the balance? Well, currently we have the welfare state, we have the redistribution of the state. So the problem is not the state. I mean, it's normal, state raise taxes and use those taxes from the rich guys to give back money to the poor guys, and they somehow compensate the the they compensate the permanent pumping of money by the interest mechanism. The problem is not the state, the problem is the bureaucracy. The problem is that the state is inefficient. It generates friction at all levels. And the thing also is those people who receive the subventions, somehow they tend to become frustrated not to be able to handle their own life. And they also tend to look for the politician who is going to give them more. And it creates some kind of clientelism, demagogy. Even the good politicians who want to work for the goods of all people, somehow, in order to work for them, they need to be re-elected. So they are going to take short-term decisions and to propose short-term system just to get to their election. Because you see, politics is another way of wealth, to get wealth, because you are going to look for recognition, you are going to look for influence, you are going to look for re-election, and somehow power. And power gives wealth. Wealth gives power, power gives wealth. That's two facets of the same coin. So at some point, the state becomes like a whale, and it's just killing the economy. And it's also killing the mind of the people. It's route to serfdom. So in a moment where the state is becoming larger and larger, can we afford more bureaucracy? Welfare states doesn't seem to be the complete solution because if you think of it, 50% of the economy is state controlled in France, and still you have that distribution of wealth. Plus, some people are so much subsidized that at some point they don't want to work anymore. So you can't make the state larger than it is. Too much tax would just kill the motivation. On the other hand, capitalism is like jungle law. It's like a free fox running in a free chicken coop. Well, the chicken is free, but it still gets eaten by the fox. So what do we want, the pest or the plague? Well, the thing is we tolerate capitalism and the fact it brings inequality because it also brings progress. So somehow we should remunerate the capital at the level of progress and keep the rest. And also I think we should keep the very low level of subsidies, the bottom one, automatic. Far from the politicians, because it's so important for the people, for their survival, that the people would vote for any politicians which promises the moon. Automatic seems a good way to handle that. So we said we should tolerate capitalism at the level of progress it creates. Let's run that on actual figures. So here I gathered some data from INSEE, the Statistical Institute of France. So this is data about France, but obviously you can reproduce that with any country. So we have here the GDP. The GDP can be decomposed into multiple figures: the salaries, the corporate profit, the mixed income, which is the revenue of the sole traders, and then the state, which is taxes minus subvention. Okay? So if I sum all that, I will find 257.9. No, sorry. I will find 1289.7, which is equal to that. So it kind of makes sense. This is the distribution of the sum of those figures will give you the GDP. Okay? I've got also the population across time, and then I can compute the growth by comparing two different years. I have the price index, which allow me to compute the inflation. And then I have the net wealth of France, which is the money you need to buy everything. Buy the cars, buy the houses, the companies, the forests, the fields, everything. You are not going to buy the citizens, but you are going to buy everything that can be bought in France with that money. Okay? So based on all that now, I can compute the capital income, which is the revenue of the capital. Okay? This is equal to the corporate profit, by definition, but I'm going also to add 1/3 of the mixed income. Because you see, the sole trader, if he's a plumber, somehow he fixes tubes or he makes installations, and he gets paid for that because it's his work, right? So somehow it's a salary. But at the same time, he has probably bought some vehicle to go from one client to the next. And this is immobilization of capital. Okay, so in that situation, you could compute how much capital is immobilized and make an exact figure, but you will need to do that plumber by plumber. And if you take a farmer, he has fields, and that costs a lot of money. He also has a tractor, a lot of machinery. So there is a lot of capital, different from the plumber. So different ratio. And if you go to a doctor, he has only a stethoscope. Okay, so that's very little capital. And if you go to a dentist, he has a dental chair, and this is expensive. So the ratio is depending on each sole trader. But there is some kind of general rule in the universe, which is not demonstrated, by the way, but it has been always true. When you have a split between capital and labor, you have 1/3, 2/3. 1/3 profit for the capital, 2/3 labor. So here, since I'm computing the capital income, I will keep only 1/3 of the mixed revenue, the sole trader revenue. Okay? Now, in 1997, the total wealth of France was almost 5,000 billions. That was the net value of France. So if I want to compute the profitability, I can say I'm going to take the net wealth. I'm going to take the capital income and divide it by the net wealth. That makes me 8.2%. Okay? I want to compare this profitability with the progress that has been created by capital. Progress is growth. So I can compute growth from the growth of the GDP by definition. Okay, so growth plus inflation, and I'll come back on the concept of inflation, is equal to, I need the previous year, so I'm not going to compute this one here, but I can compute this one here. It's equal to GDP in 98 minus GDP in 97. I need to add parenthesis in between and divide by the value in 97. And I find 439. Okay? And this computation I've done here, I can also do them here. So I will now look at the year 98. So in 98, we had a 6% profitability with a 4.39 growth, progress. Okay? So there is a difference between the two, which is equal to the profitability minus the growth plus inflation. I find 1.61%. This currently goes to profit, goes to capital, and it's not the growth. It's just something they keep for themselves. Okay? So I'm going to keep that now for the citizens. So I compute how much money does that make. So we had net wealth of 6,978. I multiply that by this profitability, which I keep for myself, and I'm going to call that the surplus rate. So this is the surplus value, which is a Marxist concept, by the way, interestingly. Okay? So I consider that this is currently kept by the capital, but it should be given to the citizen because it didn't create the proper growth at the end. Okay? So I keep that. And I will distribute that among the citizens. So I take that amount, I multiply by 1 billion to have something in euro. And I divide that by the number of citizens in 1998. And I find 1,900 euro per year. Okay? So this is something I will call the the democratic dividend. Okay, it's a dividend because it's based on the profitability of the capital across the nation. And it's democratic because it's for each citizen. One citizen, one vote. So one citizen gets one dividend. And if I look per month, now I take that money and divide it by 12. Okay? And I can propagate that until 2023. So what does that mean? So it means here that I consider that this money is kept by capital, but should not. So I want to redistribute it to the people in the form of a democratic dividend, which is paid every month. So how do I pay that amount? Well, I can make a wallet. Okay, I'm the state, so I can create a bank. Like in France, we have BPI, Banque Publique d'Investissement. It's a state-owned bank. I will ask BPI to provide a wallet to each French person, French citizen. I say French, but it's more like citizen, you know. You pay taxes, so you are a citizen. You have a fiscal number, so you can get your wallet, and every month the state will wire that money onto your wallet so that you can buy bread. Maybe the wallet has a mean of payment, so I can go and buy bread directly out of my wallet. Okay? This money needs to be taken somewhere. Okay, so I don't want to raise taxes. What I'm going to use to distribute that money is a special form of money which is called helicopter money, meaning this money is going to be created by the state, ex nihilo. So this is a complex concept. I will come back on that later. Okay? For now, what is important is that every month of 98, you received 160 euro. What about the other month? Well, in average, if you look across the last 25 years, you will find an average of 303. Okay? But you shouldn't do this average just like that, because the thing is, right now, if I look in 98, I'm looking at euro of 98, and there has been inflation. So I need to convert that to money, to euro of 2023. It's easy to do that because I have the figure. I can do this amount multiplied by the euro, the index of 2023, which is here, and divided by the index of 98. And I find 252 euro. So 160 euro of 98 is 252 euro of 23. Okay, and again, I can propagate this up to 2020. No, I have been wrong. I forget to fix that with a dollar sign. And now I can propagate. Okay? And now if I look in average, I can see that it's 394 euro, almost 400 in average. So if we had this democratic dividend, we could have given 400 euro to each citizen every month. Okay? And we should do that because this money right now is kept by the capital and it should not be. It should be distributed. Okay? So this is adjusted with inflation. Okay? So as simple as that, we compute the overdue value kept currently by capital, and we distribute this to each citizen automatically in a wallet. It's very important that it is delivered to every citizen, even the richest man in the world, which happen to be, sometimes it's in the US, sometimes it's in France. So we have this chance. But this guy should also get 250 euro per month should have get that, even though he is incredibly rich, because somehow it's like democracy, you know? He has one vote, the same as a very poor guy, so he's entitled to his democratic dividend. It has to be automatic. It can't be tricked by politicians, okay? Something else also important is if I look at this amount as across time, I can see that it's not stable at all. Sometimes it's very high, like 1,500, huge. Sometimes it's very low. And even after COVID and Ukraine, it's now negative. Okay? And of course, we want to give something to people. We want to take, we want to take from them. Okay? But what we know, because the inequality are rising, we know that this is most of the time positive. Okay? And the way to solve that is to use smoothing. Okay, so I can say that it's the 4 previous year divided by 4. Okay, and if I do that, and I look at the curve across time, I can see that it's fine. I mean, now the red smoothed curve is way better and more stable than the blue one. Okay, so with smoothing, I can make sure that people will always get a democratic dividend. Be careful, sometimes it's more than the other year, and that's logical, because if we don't create value together, we can't provide a dividend. Okay, so this mechanism works only if collectively we create value. Okay, so let's look at some year here, like let's look at the way it behaves. Like if I'm sorry, I shut down the so it's here. Let's put this here so we can look better. So here we could see that something went special in just right after 2008, which is the crisis we had. Remember? So there was a bailout, meaning that suddenly banks got a lot of money. Okay? So this can be viewed in here because the profitability in 2009 was 4.97%, but the growth plus inflation was very bad. So we had a very high profitability, and that's why we have a very high dividend. Okay? If I look in here, this is COVID. And COVID, there was a lot of money distributed to people, and that's why we have this jump in here, okay? And then after that, there was Ukraine, etc. So it became negative because we actually destroyed value with COVID. We stopped working, with the confinement, etc. And that's why suddenly it becomes negative. That's a good example of a moment where we create negative value. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have, confinement and stop quitting work, etc. I'm just saying that at that moment, collectively, we didn't produce value. And that's why suddenly we can't get a democratic dividend. Okay? And that's the value of that is now with your wallet every month, you will see how much worth, how much value we create collectively. And that's why it's so democratic, because we work as a nation. So we have to look at that together and look how much value we create. Grace to the capitalism, and we retribute the capitalism for that. They keep the value they have created as growth, but we keep the rest and we distribute it to the people. We said that each citizen is entitled to a democratic dividend. And that's why we have divided the surplus value by the number of citizens on that year. Well, among those citizens, there is a special category, and that's the young people. Young people don't vote. So should they get a democratic dividend? Well, in France, we have a concept called family allocation. The state will give a certain amount of money to each parent according to the number of their children. And with that money, they are supposed to buy food, buy clothes, buy school items, help them, grow. So it's a nice concept. We can keep that, okay? So half the democratic dividend is kept for that. But the other half, we are going to capitalize it. Okay, so if we start, for example, in a young guy, or a girl born in 2001. So I'm going to take the yearly democratic dividend and divide it by 2. This democratic dividend is going to be invested because it's capitalized. And that means it's going to generate profit according to the profitability on that year. So I can compute that theoretical profit by multiplying the amount by the profitability. So at the end of the year, I have the initial amount plus the interest. The next year, I will start with that money, and I will add again the surplus divided by 2. And this year, I will again generate interest, and again, at the end of the year, I will have the initial amount plus the interest. And this goes on and on and on until he is 21. And we can see that in 2022, 21 years after we started this process, we have an envelope of 82,000 euros, which costs nothing to no one because it's helicopter money. And this money can be given to the young guy or girl to finance study, to go into entrepreneurship. Because you have to understand something. I mean, if you have, some money that you can, some savings, or maybe some money you inherited from your parents, well, you can decide to invest that and to become an entrepreneur. You take a risk, and if you fail, you're going to lose that money, and that stings already a bit. But now imagine you have very little money, so the money you invest into your entrepreneurship is the money which is going to provide food for you and your family on the next Monday. That's very tough to do. And that means that, the people at the very bottom of the Babel Tower we've seen earlier, I mean, they can't go into entrepreneurship. They can't gain capital. They just can work. And that's probably the worst inequality ever. If you give them this kind of money to start their own company, whatever it is, you are giving them a chance to join, the feast and to climb up the ladder toward wealth. Okay? So you also have to think that very often those young people, they are, kind of willing to go into riot because they think they get nothing from the society. If you give them that kind of money, first of all, you can explain them how capitalism works and why they get that. And if at the end they decide to sit in their sofa in front of the PlayStation and smoke it, well, that will be their mistake. At least on our side, we know that we will have done our best to give them a better future. Also, something is this money which is capitalized is going to be grouped into funds. And those funds can be used to fund the economy, fund the decarbonation, invest into innovation. And that's why they get profitable. If they are not invested, they are not going to make any interest. So that's like pension funds, but financed by the young people. And that changes everything. Instead of financing the economy with the money of the old people who are going to disappear soon, you finance the economy with the money of the young who are going to be the future of this nation. And if you multiply by this money by the number of young people in the population, which is probably around 1/3, well, you are going to get huge funding for the economy. So we've seen that using helicopter money, we can distribute a lot of money to people. Okay, and the surplus value can be huge. Okay, if I look at in average, I will see 228 billions each year. Okay, so this money somehow should replace over subsidies by the state. So it can be deduced from the budget of the state. And doing that, it removes any deficit from the state, meaning that the money which is now saved can be used to reimburse the national debt. And if you think in the case of France that it's around 3,000 billions, if every year you save like 200 billion euro because of this saving from on top of the budget, well, you can reimburse the debt in like 15 years, 20 years, done. This is not a problem anymore. If we go that road, we should probably think of simplifying the state. I mean, it's crazily complex. I mean, because the money is so scarce in our economy, in our world, I mean, those politicians, they've invented completely stupid allocations. I mean, simplifying that will allow us to take all the state employees, who are handling this complexity, and reallocate them to healthcare, education, security, more efficient state means a better level of service. Let's focus now on this concept of helicopter money. I mean this money which is created out of nowhere, distributed to people, this seems too good to be true. In order to understand how that works, you need to understand inflation. And for that, I'm going to take the example of a country with 1 billion of wealth and 1 billion of money. And suddenly you have an additional 100 million of wealth. So now you have 1.1 in wealth and you still have 1 in money. The thing is, this money has to buy something, it has to go somewhere. So what will happen at the end is that you're going to get a decrease of 10% in the prices. That means that if you have money on your bank account, what you could buy at 10 in Jan, you can buy for 9 in June. So, just wait. Don't invest, don't take risk, don't do nothing. You're going to get richer anyway. So this is called deflation, and that's very bad for the economy. So how do we solve that? Well, let's print an additional 100 million of money, So who should be entitled to do that? Well, obviously, it looks like it should be the state. Fine, the state will print that. And what will they do with that money? I mean, in the past, maybe they could buy more castor, finance more, ballrooms, more gambling, go to war. And it really was like that, you print money and you go to war. It's probably too much power, to give to someone, even for a king. So eventually, they would think, why print only 100 million? I could print 200 or 300 or 400. And then what happens is the opposite, the price, they are going to go up. This is inflation. And if you print, at some point people will say, but this paper is worth nothing. And then you go into hyperinflation, which is also very bad. Okay? So how do you solve that then? Well, that's when the English folks came with a concept back in the 19th century called the central bank system. So they would give to some people, experts, economists, the right to control how much money should be printed. So those economists, those bankers, central bankers, they would go on top of Big Ben and they would count the boats that were going up the Thames. So, I mean, and they would then multiply that by the number of harbors in UK, and then they would know how much wealth was coming into the country from the colonies and so on, and they would print the money accordingly. Okay? This is an automatic process. You can't double it because the number of boats are based on the reality, so this is good. But what would they do with the money? You know, they are not going to buy more banks or more castles. The second level of the idea was to say we are going to use that money to lend it to people through banks. So if someone wants to buy a house, he can go to the bank and borrow the money. If an entrepreneur needs money to start his company, he would also get the money. And that makes perfect sense because those entrepreneurs are going to create value in the society. Those people who want to buy or build their house, they are going to hire, entrepreneurs to build the house, and they are going to also, increase the economy. The money will circulate, create wealth for everyone. So this is just perfect. Well, there is one caveat, a huge caveat, is again you only lend money to the rich people. So that means that the money gets injected at the top of this Babel Tower, which is already so thin. And at the bottom, where you have people with no money, well, they don't get the right to borrow the money. They don't get the right to be entrepreneur. And so they are going to stay poor all their life. You see? So that's really the root cause of inequality. We have a system that makes perfect sense, central bank printing money according to the growth and using that money to lend it to people. That makes complete sense, but it fuels inequality. Also remember that, inflation is good. Because very often we hear inflation is bad, and particularly from the leftist, And the reason why they say that is because the salaries are not indexed on the inflation. And that means that if suddenly there is inflation, if you don't get the raise according to the inflation, well, you lose money. And since, it's very difficult to get raise, very often when there is inflation, the workers, they are going to lose some some purchase power. And that's why, in the mindset of people, inflation is bad. But if this inflation is triggered by helicopter money, that's another story. Because anyway, you get your chunk of that money. So that's fine. Okay? Last bit is democracy is one person, one vote. So it kind of makes sense that when there is one person, there is one check. Okay? And this check being financed by helicopter money according to the wealth created by the whole economy. Now that we have understood that it makes perfect sense to just print money in order to distribute democratic dividend to every citizen, we can look at other reasons why it makes sense. One of it is the difference between market value and non-market value. GDP is about market. It's about prices. It's about this is worth this and this is worth that. But there are things in this world which have no price. Take volunteering. If you go into the street and help very poor people, you don't create market value. There's no price. But you create happiness. You help people. And doing that, you do create some value. Another example is Wikipedia. Wikipedia is free. There's no advertisement. People just decide to create pages because they know something and they want to share it with people. So frankly, Wikipedia is one of the most incredible achievements of mankind. And I really encourage you to go there and look at every concept which has been used in this video. So again, no advertisement, no real price, but great value created. And by the way, give money to Wikipedia because they still need to pay for the servers. A third example, which I like very much, is take a guy who has a family. He lives on the subsidies because he couldn't study, or maybe he's just too lazy, who knows? It doesn't adapt to the economy the way it works, whatever. So he goes to an abandoned village somewhere in the far away and find a small stream across the village, and you have some terraces which have been built 100 years ago and which have grown wild. He's going to remove all those plants, wild plants, and he's going to plant some tomatoes and zucchinis and whatever. And then, it's a Sunday, and you walked there, and you look at this nice village now with children running around on those nice terrace and stream, and that makes you happy. And when you go back to work on Monday, you feel more motivated, more courageous, and your productivity will increase. So somehow, this guy, by just planting a few tomatoes, is contributing to the GDP. You see? So at the end, it kind of makes sense that we give the democratic dividend, because it's the recognition that everyone is contributing to the society, not only using work and making money, but just by helping people and volunteering to do that. So I think it's a very good image to understand the value behind the democratic dividend, the collectivism of the society, the fact that we work together to make it better. Another reason why democratic dividend makes sense is relative to property. Property is the very first form of capital. It's very important in our society. We could talk for hours about property. There are so many things to say about that. And this video would last forever. Still, there's one concept I would like to stress here is just take a forest. You're a child, there is a forest, 1 hectare of land near your house, and you go there to hunt rabbits or whatever. And then someone comes and works for like 2 years intensively to remove all the trees and transform that hectare of forest into a field to grow crop. This guy has worked a lot, so he has the right to gain a title of property on that land. And that means that something that was belonging to no one, and hence to somehow everyone, including you, suddenly becomes only his property. And he can have this no trespassing sign. And if you want to go there and hunt, you may even have to pay a fee to him, but he has removed something from your own property. He has taken from you the right to go and hunt. So somehow he should pay something, for that. Any piece of capital, any piece of property, somehow is something that has been acquired or created by someone, but has also been removed from others. So in the economy, the progress, the transformation of a forest into a field is handled by the entrepreneur, is done by the entrepreneurs, and it's normal that they get retributions for that. But they are also somehow taking something from someone else. There's a lot of philosophical thought around that. You should read about Locke, and you should read about Proudhon and Marx. Frankly, it's very deep. Still remember that, there's always a relation between what is private and what is common, And it's very normal that the private owners are made responsible for the community. That's what does the health welfare state, which is logical and normal. It's just that it's inefficient and kills any entrepreneur. So it's kind of killing the progress. Something that dividend, democratic dividend does not. We are reaching the end of this video, and I have to admit I'm using France as an example here, but at the same time, euro is handled at Europe level, not the all countries of the European community, but quite a lot. Okay, so every calculation I've made here should be done at European level, and then we have to convince a lot of people. Hence, this video in English. Okay, so don't hesitate to come back to me. I'm waiting for your comments. As a conclusion, I'd like to remind you how that will work, because I'm pretty sure this is going to happen one day. All we need is to find a majority of people in order to change the system. Okay, so the algorithm is compute the surplus value, which is the profitability of the capital minus the growth rate minus the inflation. Use that envelope and divide it by the number of citizens to create a democratic dividend. Each young receives half of it as a dividend, and half is capitalized to fuel the economy with fundings and create for him a capital that he can then use later on to become an entrepreneur. We have fixed the state deficit, and we reimburse the national debt in 15 years. So, if you think of it, mission accomplished. But we need to hurry.